I am Caroline at the Quail Hill Cottage, and I have been chatting a lot about homeschooling. I have a large family of 6 girls, 5 of them are school aged, and I have been using a Charlotte Mason approach and Ambleside Online for my entire homeschooling experience. And today I am probably going to make the biggest video I've ever made about Ambleside Online, and that is all of my tips, all of my ideas and information about using Ambleside Year 1. So I love Ambleside Year 1. It's what I started my homeschooling journey on, and I am about to start my 5th daughter. And so as I'm gathering the books and I'm reminding myself of what I learned with my other 4 girls, I thought I would make a video. I don't know how long this is gonna be, but I have a feeling it's gonna be pretty long. It is not aesthetic. I'm probably gonna end up talking pretty fast. I will make sure there's closed captions on there. But if you are interested in starting Ambleside, if you already know you want to use a Charlotte Mason approach, but you're overwhelmed by the Ambleside Online curriculum, then this video is for you. If you've already decided to use Ambleside Online Year 1 and you just want another mom's tips and tricks while you're walking or folding laundry or whatever, this will be the perfect video for you. If you have not decided on using a Charlotte Mason approach, I would not recommend this video. I would recommend watching some of my other videos about why I chose a Charlotte Mason approach, my video on narration, to see if this style of education would work for you, because I don't think using Ambleside's reading schedule as your core curriculum is going to work unless you're also going to embrace a Charlotte Mason approach. So that's who this video is for, and I am just going to dive right in. This will be a ton of information. I will be using the Ambleside Online website, so if you want to go there and click on Year 1, we will be looking at the schedule and the book list for that. Okay, so let me give you a quick overview of what I'm going to do in this video. I have spent several weeks just writing down all of my thoughts about Year 1, making sure I remember everything I want to say to you as I'm thinking about it. So I have my computer here and I will be looking at it. But the first thing is I'm just going to give you some basic pointers about Ambleside Year 1, some things to remember, some things to keep in mind. If you've never used a Charlotte Mason approach before, some of this information may not be the way that you were taught to learn or that you've thought of children learning before. Again, I would encourage you to watch my other videos that kind of give an overview. A great book to understand the why of a Charlotte Mason approach is called For the Children's Sake. So you could listen to that or read that to get kind of the big picture of why a mom would choose to educate her children in this way. And then Ambleside Online is also coming out with a podcast this year, which I'm super excited about. That is going to be such a wealth of information from the experts in using this curriculum, the people who wrote it. So those would be great to start with. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to remind you of is truly wait till 1st grade to start Ambleside Year 1. Wait till the year that your child is turning 6 to even start formal lessons. So for me, that's their kindergarten year. And I have made a video on Ambleside Year 0 and what I do before they start kindergarten. So you can watch that if your child is not quite ready for Ambleside Year 1. But the year that they would be in 1st grade, you can begin Ambleside Year 1. So the first thing you will do is just start buying the books. And if you go to the Ambleside website and click on Years and Year 1 and then Book List, they have a list of all the books you will be using, and they have these little links and there's different symbols, and they have kind of a key for understanding what those symbols mean. But many of these books are in the public domain. So what that means is if you choose to use an electronic copy, or you can find free copies online, you can even have them printed at a print shop if you do not want to buy someone else's binding of that book. Some are not in the public domain. And so a tip I would give you is use the book that is directly linked to their Amazon or whatever other bookstore link. When you get into Amazon, sometimes you can choose like different editions, or you can choose hardcover or softcover. And I would recommend just sticking with the exact link that they sent you. If it sends you to a paperback copy, even if it looks like this isn't what I ordered. With some of these old books, the publishers don't use the right pictures of what the book really looks like. And so just stick with that link. If you don't, you may end up ordering some editions where people are trying to make money off of families that use Ambleside. There's lots of mistakes. The formatting is just not very good. So use those direct links. You can also use used bookstores, and then you really can see pictures of the books that the person has uploaded in most cases. And I will show you what my actual books look like so that you can see those. And then if you're at a homeschool bookstore or something and you see some of these, you can pick them up. There is also a Facebook group for Ambleside Online, Living Book, Charlotte Mason curriculum, where people sell some of these things on there. And so you can check that out. So the first thing would just be to start gathering the books. At the end of this, after I've gone through all the curriculum, I'm just now realizing I didn't finish giving a summary of what I'm going to be going over. I'm going to go through every single subject in the Ambleside Online curriculum and all the books that are assigned, and just my personal opinions and tips on those. And then I am going to go through a sample schedule of what I am planning on, how I'm planning on scheduling these readings for my own child. And then I'm going to have a big family suggestion of how to make this all work with many other children that are doing homeschooling. Okay, so back to buying the books. At the end, I'm going to give some tips on which books I feel like you actually need in print and which books you could use the Kindle versions or the free online versions of. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to pick a reading instruction program, you're going to pick a math program, and then you're going to pick some type of teaching them handwriting program. And I have given my suggestions in other videos, and I will also show you what my year 1 student is going to be using. I'm a big believer in the All About Reading program, and I will tell you why later on in that too. For math, I've used a couple different things, but I'll go over all that later when we cover those subjects. Okay, the next thing I would say is just to set your expectations of what your child is really going to get out of year 1. They're gonna be reading history books, they're gonna be reading geography, they're gonna be reading science books, but the truth is they are not gonna get out of these books what you as an adult are going to get out of them. And the point of this is not to just accumulate a bunch of facts, although there will be tons of facts they are exposed to, but at the end of the year, they only may remember 1 or 2 facts from these stories. The point of all of this is to expose them to good living books with beautiful language that teaches them new ideas, and it teaches them the discipline of listening and then narrating what they have heard. So what we are doing right now is just creating a culture and kind of a habit of learning. And they are going to learn from these books, but don't be discouraged if you feel like your child's not retaining the facts of them, because that is not what these books are about. They are gonna cover all of this history, all of this science, all of this geography in later years, and they will latch onto those ideas much more easily if they've been exposed to these things slowly and gently. It is also okay if some of these books are not your child's favorite, and you're not being a mean mom by having them listen to them. And I would say if they're having a hard time, sometimes the reason they don't like the books is because narrating is hard, and I would go back and watch my narration video where I give you some tips on how to handle reluctant narrators or kids who feel like they didn't get anything out of the story. But it's okay in their school life for them to be some things that aren't their favorites. Charlotte Mason compares learning to laying a feast for our child, and we invite them to eat. And sometimes we choose to eat things that aren't our favorites, but they're really good for us. As a mom, we know what our children needs of those things. So there may be a few books that are not your kids' favorites. There may be a few books that aren't your favorites. And be careful not to let that be communicated to your child, because it may end up being something they do love. But just know these are just little bits of their day. Their day can be filled with so many other things that they love doing. There will be so many other books that they love reading. But don't be afraid if your child's natural reaction to a book is that they don't like it or they dread it. Just very gently, keep doing it. Remind them it's just 20 minutes, once a week that we're gonna do this. And at the end, it's okay if they don't like it, but we're still going to do it because it's the right thing to do. Okay, another big thing about a Charlotte Mason approach is to have short lessons, especially in these early years. And so that is true for the mom. You are in control of how long the lessons go on. And it is much, much, much better to leave a child wanting more than to push a lesson farther than it should have gone. So with these readings, I'm gonna suggest some readings that in my family, I found it helpful to split into 2 or more days so that you're just taking tiny chunks of it and it's not overwhelming for your child. The same happens with your reading lesson. Do not do a reading lesson based on we are going to finish a whole unit, because that unit may be really difficult that day for your child. Go off of we are going to work as hard as we can for 20 minutes or 15 minutes or 10 minutes, and then after that we're going to be done. And you can use a visual timer, which is really helpful. And then as your child trusts that you are going to keep your word, you're not going to punish them, by doing more school than they feel like they're able to do. They're going to choose to work hard in those 20 minutes of lessons. And I feel like I need to make a whole other video about how I learned, what to use a timer for in a Charlotte Mason education and what not to use it for. But just keep the lessons short. Let your child be excited for the next time. Let your child be left wanting to do more instead of letting your child just devour some of these books very quickly and then be overwhelmed in other subjects that they can't do that quickly. So there is some great information on the Ambleside website about the art of reading slowly and why it's so good for our kids to split all of these books up over a term, over 12 weeks. and how good that is for your child. There'll be other times that they can binge read, a book or listen to an audiobook in one sitting. But with these school books, really develop that art of just taking small chunks in many different books throughout the week. I would say that don't get overwhelmed by how many subjects there are to cover. And I'm gonna be honest with you, with my younger girls, I do not always get to all the extra subjects like foreign language, composer study, art study, nature study. Sometimes I have, sometimes I haven't, but it can be overwhelming when you're trying to add in all of those things. So just start very slowly. I would start with your first week doing some math and doing some reading instruction and some handwriting. If you've already got that under your belt from doing that in kindergarten, then you can start on a gentle week 1 with Ambleside. But if you need to take 2 weeks to do the first week, that's okay. Don't make your child and yourself hate it so much that you dread doing it. Just introduce it very slowly, because the whole point of this type of education is that we are creating an environment of learning. So learning is not just happening when we are sitting down and reading these school books. We are creating an environment where our child is curious, where our child loves to listen, where our child loves to observe, and that is going to happen through these school books, but it's also going to happen in many other ways. So do not overwhelm yourself and do not overwhelm your child by trying to start too much at once. In my year 0 video, I talk about some ways to establish some good habits in that kindergarten year so that year 1 will go more smoothly. I have not always been able to do that. Sometimes I've had a new baby, sometimes I've had a really hard pregnancy, sometimes I've moved. And so I'm not saying that from a place of, I did this perfectly. I'm saying if you were able to start this, it would be helpful. But if you didn't, it's still okay. You can still make this work for your family. Another thing to know is you as a mom can have the freedom to lighten your load. So if you need to use more audiobooks for your child to be able to expose them to these books, but you can't physically read to them every single time, then do that. If you need to cut some books from the schedule, that's okay. As I said, your child is still going to be learning. It's still about the atmosphere and environment you create for them. And if you are so stressed, I'm probably talking to you type A moms, which is also me. If you're so stressed about checking off all the boxes, that is not going to create the environment that we want for our children. So lighten your load as you need to through seasons of life, and know that this is a 12-year education. So much happens in a year. And if there's a year that is kind of a more weak year with formal learning, for me, that was the last couple of years because we moved, I had a new baby, it was very hard, but I still took comfort because I've done it for long enough in that my children were still getting what they needed and we were gonna make up for lost time later on. In these early years, I would say focusing on reading and math is one of the most important things, because those are things that will be harder to catch up on later in life. These books will still be there when you enter into easier seasons, but just keep up with those daily math and reading lessons, if nothing else. Here's some mistakes I made when I started year 1 for the first time with my daughter. I was way too focused on like all of the fun activities. And even though this is embarrassing, I'll give you an example. We were gonna study astronomy that year as part of our nature study. And I got these really adorable books. Like there's one by the author of Curious George, all about the stars, very sweet. But then I took it like farther and I made all these cards where we were gonna like punch out the constellations and we were going to embroider them with yarn and we were gonna make things out of Play-Doh. And I spent so much time on all of that stuff getting ready for homeschooling. I bought all of these like manipulatives and all the fun things that look fun to buy. And it really distracted me from what was most important. You do not need all those things. In fact, I would call what I was doing with the Curious George Star book and the cards a unit study. And a unit study and Charlotte Mason education are not compatible, because a unit study tries to present the connections for the child, and a Charlotte Mason approach wants the child to make those connections. So that doesn't mean you don't read about the stars. If they're interested in the constellations or whatever, you can read books about that. If they want to create a Play-Doh model of the solar system, that's fine, but I found most kids don't want to do that. They want to read the information and they want to hear about it, but then they don't want to do all these other hands-on activities. They may just want to play with Play-Doh, and that's totally fine. So don't be like me. Don't overwhelm yourself with all this cutting out and finding all these unit studies and feeling like that. That is not what a Charlotte Mason education has to be, and I've seen the results of not using all of that. I didn't end up using any of that stuff. And just letting the child be introduced to all these amazing ideas through the books and then letting them make connections with the world. Another thing I would say is don't be afraid to use things that your child finds enjoyable as a reward for finishing the work that they were supposed to do during the day. So for my girls, that is electronics. They like to play Nintendo Switch together. My 3 older girls like to watch shows together. And the fun thing is those are still like group activities. They're not locking themselves in their rooms and doing stuff on a device all alone. But I'm in control of how much they do it, and I'm in control of when they do it. So for them, especially in those long winter months, it's a reward for getting all of their work done. I give them a set time. My kids are very respectful of that time, not because they don't love electronics, but because they are not in a state of deprivation from electronics. And sometimes I think we create that in our children. Like, we want to be so non-techy, we want to be so screen-free with our older kids that we create this like craving in them for it, instead of teaching them to use it in very measured amounts and knowing that I can put it down, I can put it away, because I am going to get a chance to do it again. But I don't at all feel like my children are addicted to it. They're used to maybe an hour, maybe in the summer 2 hours a day, and they have great attitudes about it when it's time to put it down. So do not be afraid of using that kind of stuff, using a show, you know, that your kid likes for at the end of the day, the baby's napping, you want to get some stuff done. They did a great job getting their school done, playing with their siblings. Use those things in measured amounts as rewards for getting their work done. Hopefully I didn't just lose a lot of you with that advice. But now I want to talk about 2 important things that I've heard in relation to Ambleside Online, especially from Christian parents. And the first one is about the violence in the stories, and the second one is about magic in the stories. Okay, so the first one is about violence in historical stories. 2 books I'm thinking of in particular is Trial and Triumph, which is some history of the early church and martyrs. And the second one is the book Our Island Story, which is the story of Britain from civilization, and then you're going to use it all the way till we start branching off into American history. And so what I want to say about violence is sometimes when we as adults who have these beautiful, precocious children read some of these stories where people are getting their head cut off, or they are in these battles and they get stabbed, we are horrified and we're like, oh my word, like, I can't believe I'm sharing this with my little 6 or 7-year-old. But the truth is, I've learned as I've watched my own children and as I remember back to my own childhood, is children do not necessarily have a context for that violence, especially if they haven't seen it in any movies, and they haven't really put themselves in the place of someone experiencing that kind of violence. And so for them, it does not hit them the same way that it hits us. They are enjoying the action of the story. They're not thinking about like the actual what's physically happening, you know, when this violence is occurring. And you will have a few truly sensitive children who do that, and it does bother them. And that's when you as the parent need to say whether you need to use different wording when you're reading it out loud, or if you need to skip certain stories altogether. But I would not assume that it's going to be too much for your child. I would say Trial and Triumph of all the books is the most honest and violent about what happened. And there have been stories that I have maybe changed the wording of what was happening for different children. And so pre-reading those 2 may be good. I would not, like I said, assume that it's going to bother your child. Our Island Story introduces the violence much more gently, and it's presented in a very nonchalant way, just something that happened in battle. And so that would be a good one to try out with your child and see if it bothers them. But if it's like keeping them up at night, if they're crying, if they're worried about it, then as a parent, I would choose which stories I'm going to use, and if a simple change of wording would help, or if they need to skip those stories altogether. The second one, and this even more applies to Christians, is the use of magic in stories. So the beginning of Our Island Story starts off with kind of the mythical Neptune and his son, I believe it's his son Albion, who like founds the island of Britain. I don't remember. I'm going to be reminded of that this year. Anyways, it is a fairy tale of how Britain was created. And as the first story in that book, you know, I can just see parents being like, oh my word, what am I reading my child? But that is a part of their folklore. And I'm going to talk about this more when I go over the Island Story book in general. But I just want to say that I was raised in a family that my parents were new Christians and were very sensitive to things like witchcraft and the occult and anything that tasted of, you know, the world in that way. And they were advised by the homeschooling groups they were in, not to talk about magic, not to use magic, not to even mess with those things that, Satan could take possession of your families through that. I was not allowed to read the Harry Potter books. And I, as an adult, have chosen to take a different approach. I appreciate my parents being careful. I do not at all feel like they were doing it out of anything but love, and they were just trying to be careful with us as the kids. And it didn't necessarily hurt me not to read those things, but I do feel like I want my children to have a little bit more of a well-rounded education, and I'll talk about this later. But I think the more you read to your kids are smart, and they are not going to be tricked by things. And in fact, the more mythology that you read to your kids, the more that they are going to see how most civilizations' theology and folklore is mirroring what we believe the truth is what happened at creation, what has happened, in the story of the world and through God and through his Redeemer. So it's really interesting to read a lot of the Viking mythology, a lot of the Roman and Greek mythology, and all of these things, and know that they are based partly in truth. The Roman and Greeks' view of the creation of the world has some elements of what we believe was the real creation. And so you don't need to be afraid that your child is going to be confused about what the truth is. In fact, I feel like it caused more confusion for me as an adult to be introduced to so many more beliefs that I wasn't familiar with than it would have been as a child to very clearly see, like, this is just a silly story that people made up to explain what happened, and here is where we know what really happened. So I hope that's helpful. I know that wasn't very succinct, and if you are someone who is a Christian now and you came out of a background that used the occult or witchcraft, I can totally understand how for you some of those stories may not be the right choice. But just know that just because you struggled with that and God brought you out of that, it doesn't mean that your children will have those same struggles. And sometimes I think in our overcorrection, we can produce a whole new set of problems. So don't write off these stories that are fiction and use magic in them. I think if you are a family who is still teaching your child truth, but you're teaching them that history is full of people's opinions and perceptions of what happened, and that we have to have a place where we find ultimate truth, then your kids are going to be in a really safe place to be able to ask questions and explore the world and the, thousands and hundreds of thousands of different beliefs that there are, and not feel scared that they've only been exposed to one, if that makes sense. So that's what I'll say. And there's much more information on the Ambleside Online website about that. But I understand where people are coming from with that situation, but I also have experienced kind of more of a fear-based education of Christian children. And I would say that, and for us, we are choosing a different approach with our own children. Not because we are not still very conservative in our theology and our beliefs, but because we aren't afraid of our children interacting with those ideas, especially under the guidance of a parent. Okay. All that to say, we are going to dig into the actual schedule now. Now, I meant to print this out and I'm out of printer paper. I tried to print it on cardstock and it jammed my printer, so I'm not going to do that. But if you would like to have it printed out, that would be helpful, because how I like to schedule, I have my daughter's year 4 schedule from last year. So I'm just going to use this as an example. So for the older kids, this was the schedule printed out for the term from Ambleside Online, and I only use that first side of the page. The other page has like some of the daily and weekly work, and I don't find that necessary because I'm keeping track of that. And for my older girls, I print out just like a daily schedule, and I will give them, some of my girls do better marking off each day what they've done, and so I give them a new one of these every week. And for every term, I make a new one depending on what the books are that term. So they have daily work up here. These are things they are going to do every day or, bi-weekly. And then down here is their Ambleside readings. And so like on Monday, my daughter had Men of the Mississippi and either Trial and Triumph or Answering the Cry, because those two were switched off. And so then she would look at what week she was on for the reading and then do that, or we would do that together. And for my year 1 students, where I am doing all the reading to them, I will often just put like a little initial of the day of the week, like MWTH, to tell me what books I've split up on which days. You can also print out something like this if you want to. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you what I think my sample schedule is going to be for my year 1 daughter in the first term. So if that is helpful for you, based on like the length of the books, I try and split up and have some like longer, harder books paired with some more fun or easy short books during the days so that they're not getting overwhelmed. And then the last thing I'll say before we dive into the subjects is all of these books are meant to be read aloud to your child. None of these books are supposed to be read by the child. These books are usually way above their reading level, just like if you think about in a lot of picture books, like there's picture books that are meant for kids to read, learn to read, and then there's picture books that are meant for a parent to read to them. The language is like way above a beginner reader who would be interested in that story at that age. And so none of these books are meant to be read by your child, and don't put that expectation on them at all, or they're going to get frustrated. If your child's eager to read, that's what the free reads can be for, and we'll talk about that later. My girls begin to read their own books in years like 3 to 5, and by 6 to 8, they're totally independent reading their own books. So if that helps you with the expectation, that is what can make the younger years of Ambleside a lot on the parent. And I'm going to give you some ideas of how to help with that, especially if you have a lot of other kids. This ends up only taking like an hour or two if you do it, or if you need to split it up throughout the day because you've got other kids that need your attention, you can do it in little 20-minute increments. It looks like a lot, but it doesn't take a lot of time. Okay, so if you have the Ambleside website, you can go to year 1, and then schedule, and I'm opening the PDF version. And if you want to print that out, you can, or you could just look at it while we are chatting. And I'm just gonna go through the different subjects. Actually, if you'll go to the subjects tab, that's what I'm gonna go through. Okay, so the first thing is Bible. And if you are not a religious person, I would still encourage you to read Bible as a form of literature, because it is a work of literature that has endured for many thousands of years. So even if you strictly study it for that reason, you can do that. There are 2 schedules. There's one at the top that is for the specific year. And then a lot of families like to do the readings as a family. And so below that is if you are going to do a whole family Bible reading schedule, you can use that. And I have just chosen to do the specific year 1 reading schedule because my older girls do their own reading from the Ambleside Bible schedule. So that's just worked for us. But if you'd like to combine your whole family, you can do that. And then I would say, as a pastor's wife and a Christian of many, many years, that I do not see this as a time to teach doctrine from the subjects or from the readings, or to tell them the point of the story or to belabor that. I just want in these readings the child to interact with chronological readings of the Bible and to be able to narrate them like they would any other book that they're narrating. So this is really hard for some Christian parents to step back and just let their child interact with it and not feel the need to correct things. That can totally happen at other times. You can be reading devotionals with your family. You guys can be memorizing scripture and talking about it. But as this is a part of their school readings, I would just let them interact with it and make connections with it and encourage them to narrate it and thank them for their narration, and not use it as a time to correct them, to lecture them, to discuss doctrine, all those things. They may have questions from it, and you can answer those questions, and that's a great way to discuss it. A great question to start off with if they ask a question is, what do you think? And let them grapple with what they read and what they know, from other parts of the Bible, and see what they come up with, and then have a discussion about it. But as a part of the school day, do not use this as a doctrine time necessarily. Just let it be something they read and narrate. Okay, so sometimes the Old Testament readings are multiple chapters, and if that's the case, I will split those up throughout the week, so it's like 1 chapter a day. And then the New Testament readings are much shorter. Ambleside, says you can use the King James version strictly because the language that it uses is going to make some of the other books we read more accessible. And that's totally fine. I grew up, using the King James a lot, and I prefer using the ESV with my children. But if you want to expose them, if your children have never been exposed to some of that language through old hymns or old books, then it might be helpful to try out the King James just in the school readings, and then use whatever you want to use as a family later on. Okay, so the next subject, and one of the ones I love the most in an Ambleside program, and I feel like I have learned so much more as an adult than I did in school, is history. And so Charlotte Mason recommended learning the history of your own kind of land and people, and then branching out from there. And so that's, if you're an American, which the Ambleside authors are, then that's where we start. So American history starts in England, and England history started with the Romans conquering the Britons. And before that, we're not necessarily sure what happened. And that's why our island story will start off with more of a magical story of the founding of Albion or Britannia, and then go into the Romans kind of conquering of it. And like I said in the discussion of magic, don't be afraid of this story, especially if you're a Christian parent and your radar automatically goes up. And just let your child be read the story, and don't preface it with anything. And then your child will be like, is this true? And you can ask them, what do you think? And they're probably going to realize that it's not true. They're going to know it's a fairy tale, and that's okay. And that's when we can start as a family realizing that history is written from people's point of views, and people's point of views are often not the whole story. And I think a great example of this is later on when you'll read John Smith. Like, John Smith wrote so much about his adventures in the New World, but we only have it from his perspective. So of course he was making himself look better than he probably was in those situations. Of course he was giving his opinion on those events. And so we understand that when we read it, and we don't take it as universal truth. And realize, like, for every John Smith stories, there's a bunch of other people who interacted with him that may have a different perspective, and that's what history is. And it's still valuable to see what people were thinking in this period of time and what the motion of civilization was, but realizing, like, none of these history books are a perfect representation of what was going on in everybody's civilization and in everybody's minds. So taking all these history texts with a grain of salt, as you should be doing with all history, realizing that it's written by the peoples whose stories survived, and for every story that survived, there's many, many that did not. Along with the history of the British Isles, in our island story, you're going to start some history of the Vikings. And this is another one where there's a lot of magic, and in my opinion, is one of the more confusing books to start, because I think in America we just have less exposure to some of the Viking religion and ideas than we do some of the other things. I meant to be showing you these books. This is my copy of Our Island Story. It's a hardcover, which is nice because I've used it 5 times and we'll use it a 6th time. So this is what Our Island Story looks like. Wrong book. This is Viking Tales, which is the one I'm talking about right now. It is published by Sandy Croft Publishing. And in this edition, there are some definitions of words, which is really helpful, of cultural things that you may need a little bit of understanding of. And so what I would do is just familiarize yourself with those, and then before you start reading the story, be like, when they talk about this, this is what that means. And I talked about that in my narration video, I believe, where that's the purpose of pre-reading, is to figure out some words that your child may need to find or whatever, so that they don't get distracted from the story wondering, like, what does that mean? What does that mean? So that's helpful. And I feel like once you get more and more into this book, the more they will understand it. But I think this is one of the coolest books I've read in year 1, because I totally did not understand the connection of the Vikings to, like, William the Conqueror and Normandy, and then what happened when they came over and took over the royal line of England. So super cool for me to make those connections as I'm reading this. And it's totally okay that my daughters have not, because I was probably taught these things at some point in my school education and didn't really latch onto those ideas. There's another book in year 2 called The Little Duke that will continue that connection between the descendants of the Vikings that fled from Norway and settled in France and Normandy. So maybe a harder read for your child to get used to, but it's really cool to see that connection in history. And just a reminder with all of these history texts, and I've said this before, but it is okay if they do not get the facts of the story. So sometimes their narrations are just like off the wall and they are getting all the characters confused, or even getting things confused from like other readings, and that's okay. You can ask some like clarifying questions if you want to. They may not remember the names, and that can be very paralyzing for them in their narrations, and just tell them like, it's okay if you don't remember their names, just tell me like what they did. Or you can help with them with their names, especially as you get into our island story where it goes through all the rulers and kings of England, and all their names sound the same and they're all like descended from each other. Can get confusing. So just don't let your child get frustrated with that. Just be like, oh yeah, it's hard for me to remember that too, but what did he do, in history? And let them narrate the story to you of what he did, as opposed to remembering he was so-and-so's son and his uncle and blah, blah, blah. Okay, so 50 Famous Stories Retold. This is a short, sweet, and fun book that is a great assignment on some days when you do some longer, harder readings. And these are just some of the most famous stories from Greek, Roman, British, European culture that every child should know. And I've heard some of these, I think, when I was young, but it's so cool how many times I have heard these stories referenced in literature since I learned them. And it's like one of those things where if I hadn't read the story, I would have totally missed that reference. Some books that I'm thinking of are like A Gentleman in Moscow, references so much literature. And I caught on to quite a few things, especially that I've learned in the Ambleside Online program. But for everyone I caught, I was like, I'm sure there's like 6 that I'm missing, 6 references to literature and things that I don't know. So it's really cool to have read these. Children enjoy them. They often have great stories of character and morality in them. These are great for little boys who need some of those knights, and noble kings to follow. But all kids will love them, especially because they're not too long. So this is a fun little book of historical stories. And then the last history text, I'm not sure where my copy is, I did not grab that one, is called Trial and Triumph. And like I said, it is a Protestant viewpoint of the early church founding and martyrs. So if you are not a Protestant, you may have some disagreements with that book, and you may choose to use something from your own religion's viewpoint. And this is by far the most violent of the year 1 books, and one that I have skipped sometimes for my own girls, depending on where they're at. They will cover the early church history in later years through a different book. So I have felt confident in sometimes not using this one for my girls, but you may have a child who's really interested in this subject, and it is interesting as a parent to read it, but just take that with a grain of salt and maybe do some pre-reading of the assignments for this year to decide if it's the right fit for your family. Okay, the next thing in the list of subjects is a timeline. And the idea is just for your child to center themselves in their place in history and to see how their own personal history has unfolded, and then to start putting people in places in the history of the world. And this is another really great thing that I have received from using an Ambleside curriculum, using an Ambleside education with my girls, that I didn't feel that I necessarily got as a child in school and college. And that is just an understanding of when all of these events of the world interacted with each other. So for your child, I'm gonna caveat this by saying that I have not done this with my girls. So, this is one of those extras that is nice to add, but don't let it overwhelm you. But they can start with just a simple string and note cards, a timeline of their own life. So starting with birth, and then drawings and writings of different events that have happened to them, and showing them how to place them in chronological order. And then they can start doing that with some of the characters that they're reading about in history. So as you go through our island story, if they want to draw a little picture of something that happened in that story to remind them, and then you guys place that in chronological order, that is just a visual thing for them to see and start to understand how history works together. Great idea, but do not feel overwhelmed if you're not able to make it happen. Okay, the next subject is biography, and this year you use 3 of the Deolaires, I think is how you say it, books throughout the 3 terms. So these are another short and sweet reading that I just divide up the amount of pages over how many weeks I have, and we read a few pages once a week. And there's pictures, so they enjoy those a lot. I will say, and the Ambleside Online warns you of this, that there's a depiction in George Washington of happy slaves. that work on his plantation. And there will be other books in the Ambleside Online that counter that idea and provide more of an honest look at slavery in America. But that may be something that you want to discuss and remind your child that there was no such thing as happy enslaved people, and that all of our historical figures, while they did many good things, also did things that were wrong. And in our family, it's a reminder that there was only one perfect human, and all the other attempts at finding a perfect leader outside of that one perfect king will fall short. And we don't need to hide the ugly parts of history because we think that we won't find a person worthy of following. There has been a person worthy of following, and it is not George Washington, although he had some great insight into other things. Okay, the next subject, hopefully I didn't lose you guys there too, saying some controversial things in here. The next subject is literature, one of my favorites. And so let me gather up these books. Okay, so these are fun to just divide all throughout the week, so it's not too much on any one day, but this is the Aesop's Fable for Children, illustrated by Milo Winter. There are other versions of this. This has been a great one for us. It has really beautiful illustrations in it. And with this is a short, sweet one, very classic tales to assign on a day with maybe some harder readings. I don't necessarily read the moral at the end because in a Charlotte Mason fashion, I sometimes like my child to make those connections themselves. And they may say things like, what did that mean? And then I would start off with my favorite question again, what do you think? And just get them thinking about it. And don't necessarily feel like you have to correct every wrong take that they have from moralistic stories. Just let them interact with them and kind of develop that habit of asking questions and seeing how that fits in what they know is true of the world. Okay, the Blue Fairy Book. This is one of the most classic compilations of fairy tales from the world. You're going to recognize so many of our modern fairy tales from these stories. This can be a little bit of a weird one for some people, especially if you did not grow up reading fairy tales or you do not like fiction. And I'm going to say, like I said earlier, don't let that distaste for it rub off on your child. Embrace it with the same excitement that you come to the historical texts, because your child may end up really liking these. But this is going to be some exposure to beautiful language. It's going to be exposure to the way that fairy tales were told. And then later on, you're going to read, for example, in later years, The Princess and the Goblin, which was like the first English fairy tale novel written and inspired so many writers. If you read people like Tolkien or C.S. Lewis who inspired them, it was George MacDonald who first started putting some of these English fairy tales down on paper. So this is really important for their development of storytelling and literature. I do split this up sometimes depending on how many pages it is. It can be nonsensical at times. It can be repetitive at times. Do not let that make you throw it away. Still do it for your child. It's good for them, even if it's not your favorite book. Another one that is probably one of the hardest books for year one parents to handle is Rudyard Kipling's Just So Stories. And I'm just gonna tell you that this has become one of my favorites. It is so fun, but you do have to almost get into a character to read this book. Kipling plays with language so much, and that is so fun for a kid. I have kids that just make up words all the time and they make up their own language. And if you will read this in a way that the kids can see that's what he's doing, they will have so much fun. And remember that it's okay to go past a sentence in this book and be like, what? And that's kind of what he's doing. But you kind of need to read it in a little bit of a storytelling character. And if you hate it and you can't make yourself do that, then this is one that I would say maybe listen to a really great audiobook of together. And it may even get you inspired to be able to read it in that same attitude. Another book that people struggle with is the A. Milne stories, the Winnie the Pooh stories. These are very British, and I have grown to love that style of writing. Let me see if I can just give you an example. Okay, so this is, I think, the second story, How the Camel Got His Hump. And I'll just give an example, this is embarrassing, of how I would read this. In the beginning of years, when the world was so new and all, and the animals were just beginning to work for man, there was a camel, and he lived in the middle of a howling desert because he did not want to work. And besides, he was a howler himself. So he ate sticks and thorns and tamarisks and milkweed and prickles, most excruciating idle. And when anybody spoke to him, he said, "Humph, just humph, and no more." Presently, the horse came to him on Monday morning with a saddle on his back and a bit in his mouth and said, "Camel, oh camel, come out and trot like the rest of us." "Humph," said the camel, and the horse went away and told the man. So it will continue like that. But like that word excruciating, it's written without the EX, just an apostrophe SC. And it's kind of like you just have to get into like almost a narrator's persona. Think of an old British man reading this. And so those are fun, and your child will probably love them, but I know as an adult, a lot of people struggle with them. Another thing is there is a racial slur in there, unfortunately. So if you are listening to the audiobook, you may want to figure out a way, if it's an accurate audiobook, to skip past that. And if you're reading it out loud, you'll just want to change that word. Talking about racism and things like that in history will come up with your child, but I just don't always know that a young child is able to understand why people would do that or why people had that mindset, because to many of our children now, it is clear, how wrong that was. And so that can be a chance to have that discussion, or you may just want to edit it out completely and have that discussion as you read more historical texts with more racist depictions in them from the mindsets of those times. Again, reading it in a book doesn't mean we agree with it, but we are teaching our child to think critically and to see what is good to take from history and what we can learn from. This is Tales from Shakespeare. I prefer the Edith Nesbit edition. I have tried both of them, the Lambs and this one, and I prefer this one. And often in Charlotte Mason approach, you do not use paraphrases of the great works of literature. She was very big on letting the child, like the people who wrote the stories were artists, and just like we don't replace the Mona Lisa with a cartoon version to make it easier for kids to interact with, in great works of literature, we use the expert, the artist, the writer's original text. And so this is unusual for a Charlotte Mason approach, but this was written very beautifully. These are very beautifully written with old language paraphrases of the Shakespearean plays, and they are just going to give you a foundation for your child, who is then in years 4, I think, going to start reading the actual Shakespeare plays. And so this is one of those few instances where we would read an abridged or annotated or edited version of a work of art. And this is one that sometimes needs to be split into 2 days. They don't look very long, but they're very dense when you're reading them. And I think I talked in my narration video about sometimes I will use characters to represent the people we're reading about, because it goes so fast, the storyline does, that they may need some help understanding, like Titania is this stuffed animal and Oberon is this one and Puck is this one, as they're doing it. But it is so fun to introduce kids to the plots of these plays, because these plays have influenced so many of the books and movies that we watch today. And so you will just work these into your week, and then later on you will introduce them to the actual plays that they've read in these summaries. I believe it's the last literature, Parables from Nature. And these, I do recommend the modern English version. They'll still be challenging to your child, but these can be kind of long. So I do find I have to split these up into several days. And then they are a little moralistic, and to adults that can feel, especially depending on the background you came from, maybe not what you would usually go for, but I would just use them and let your child interact with them, and do not feel like you have to explain them or anything. They may not take away the actual moral of the story. They may just like the characters of the little bugs and things that the stories are about. So I'm kind of like about it. If I cut out something because I don't have time, this is usually it. But as someone who's grown up in a Christian culture and very strict Christian culture, I'm very sensitive to moralizing. And so that's probably my own weakness, but I would just use it, and I use it, but it's okay with me if my child doesn't take from it everything that was meant to be taken from it, if that makes sense. Okay, poetry. Love poetry. Not something I studied growing up, and these are great starts to poetry. This is a collection of A.A. Milne's poetry, like Now We Are Six, When We Were Very Young, and then it also has the Winnie the Pooh and the House at Pooh Corner stories. So fun. And if you've watched the original Disney Winnie the Pooh, you will know exactly how to read these stories. These are another one that I feel like people can get hung up on because they are so British. Like they go off, they have these long sentences that go off on these little tangents, and you just kind of have to like mumble along with them like you hear the narrator in that original Winnie the Pooh video do. And they are just so cute. I love these. I love reading these out loud. They can be a challenge. So again, if you need to use an audiobook for those, do that. These are very sweet poems. And I try and do poetry every day. If I have like a morning basket, morning routine that I talked about in year 0, you can make poetry a part of that. And then I usually try and, for recitation, which I'll talk about later, choose some of the poems that we are reading that year or that term. I also do not have them narrate poetry. Poetry is just something that we enjoy. I read it with expression and beautifully, but we do not narrate the poetry, we just kind of enjoy it. Okay, next is copy work. So in the early years, my copy work is teaching my children printing and then cursive. And you can do that in a Charlotte Mason education by just picking a passage from a book they're reading, or it can be a poem or something like that, and they copy it down. You write it out neatly for them, or they look at it from the book and copy it down. I haven't always been that organized, so I just like to use the Handwriting Without Tears, or with my 5th daughter, I also tried out the Simply Charlotte Mason handwriting curriculum. So I just use one of those to teach printing. We do a page a day, it's just their practice. I do supervise it to make sure that they are using proper form and that they're forming the letters the correct way. With Handwriting Without Tears, they also try and teach a lot of like grammar and creative writing and stuff like that, and I don't use it for that. I just strictly use kind of the copy work parts, but you don't need any of those books. You could just get some paper, handwriting paper, and like you write out a passage and they copy it very beautifully, make it very short so that they can do their best work. And so that is copy work that would be done daily. And like I said, in the early years, I use it as handwriting practice. And then in the later years, my daughters have like a little notebook that's almost like a quote book. And each day I have them pick just a little sentence or passage from something they read. And then at the end of the year, they have this little book full of different quotes from different books that they did. And that's how they practice their cursive. So that's copy work. Okay, phonics and reading. This is another thing that you'll do every day. And you already know that I like the All About Reading program. So with my first grader, I will be starting All About Reading level 1. I did the All About Reading pre-reading with her in kindergarten just to kind of get in the habit of reading lessons with my first daughter. She had gone to preschool, and so she had gotten some reading instruction, but I just have jumped right into level 1 of All About Reading, and you just need to take it slow. These lessons aren't necessarily meant to be done in one sitting. I split them up into at least 2 lessons. I do the teaching of, I should probably do a video about my All About Reading routine. I do a teaching of the new concept or letter sound, and there's usually a game that goes with that. And then there's a practice sheet. And depending on how long the practice sheet is, we might get the lesson done in one time, but as they get further and further on, the practice sheets are pretty long. And so we'll do like every other word on the practice sheet, and then the next day we finish the practice sheet. And then after you finish that lesson, usually the next lesson is reading a couple of stories. So the first day, I will do the warm-up sheet for the first story and then read the story. And then the second day, I'll do the warm-up sheet for the second story and read the second story. So in a week, I'm getting through about 2.5 lessons of All About Reading on average. And that has been a great setup for us. You definitely do not want these reading lessons to take too long, unless you have like a super fast reader. All of my girls, I have dyslexia, I have ADHD in our family, and so I've wanted reading to be a positive experience, and so I've chosen to take it slower and follow their pace and do more of like, we're gonna work on it for this amount of time, as opposed to we are going to finish a lesson, if that makes sense. And then after you finish level 1, you can start on level 2. I typically have not gone past level 3 of All About Reading. At that point, I feel like they're just ready to start reading aloud to me from some of the free reads. And so I do have a daughter that got into I think she got into level 3, but I suspected a dyslexia struggle, and so we got it diagnosed, and she did have dyslexia. and so she's in tutoring for that. So we've taken a break from All About Reading. It's still the Orton Gillingham approach in her tutoring, and that's what was comforting to me about using All About Reading, is if there was any sort of learning disability, this curriculum is made to address that. And so we've taken a break from that. But for my other girls, after about All About Reading level 3, they just go straight into reading aloud to me from books. But when you start level 2, you can also start All About Spelling. So I do not start level 1 with level 1 of All About Reading. I don't remember where I read that you're supposed to stagger these, or maybe a friend told me. But I start this, and this can be part of your phonics, reading, dictation, stuff for the day. And how I do these lessons is you will learn a new letter sound. And there's a really great app that you can use on the iPad to build the letters. They have different practicing. And then they spell 10 words with the letter tiles. And then the next day I have them spell those words on paper. And so we get about through 2.5 lessons of this every week also, starting that with All About Reading level 2. Okay, the next thing on the subject list is recitation. That is just learning to recite things beautifully and with expression. Ambleside has given you suggestions of the things you should memorize, have your child memorize in the different terms. And I've often just picked my own things, like, for example, if we were in church, a church program that had some scripture memory, like Awana or something, that was our scripture memory for the week, and we would work on that. Or we would pick passages, whole passages that we would memorize as a family. And same with poetry with my younger girls. In our morning time, we would memorize a poem a month. And in those early years, I often picked things from A.A. Milne or Robert Louis Stevenson. My girls still remember some of those poems. They're so sweet. So just the idea is that sometime during the day, you're working on memorizing something that they can recite beautifully and present it beautifully. And that's some of the only memorization that you will do in a Charlotte Mason approach. I know there's other approaches that are much more memory based, but just learning these little beautiful bits of poetry and scripture, you'll also memorize hymns and folk songs, is what we have the students try and commit to memory. My phone is alerting me that the battery is draining quickly, so hopefully I get through all of this before my phone dies, because my microphone is hooked up to my USB port. So the next thing is foreign language. This is something I have done better with in some years than others. We found the TalkBox Mom approach really accessible for our family. My husband has studied Spanish, and so we chose Spanish as a family. Charlotte Mason recommends learning the language of the culture closest to you. And we've lived in Georgia and Utah, so Spanish is a big part of those states. I would love for them to learn French or something like that, and a lot of the kids in the British schools would learn French because they were so closely connected to France. So that's just one of those things. Don't stress it, but introduce it slowly as you can. Later on, the girls also take Latin, so that's another foreign language exposure. Okay, so moving on to geography. Paddle to the Sea is kind of your geography book. This is another short, sweet one, easy to read. The kids usually really enjoy it. There's beautiful illustrations and pictures with it. And so like this page would be 1 week of reading that they would narrate. And so the point of these books is to introduce your children to some geography ideas, but don't shove it down their throats. And so what you would do is print out a map of Paddle's, of the Great Lakes area, and then they can track Paddle's journeys through the map each week. And I'm just gonna go ahead and say, I haven't always done a great job of the map part of it. There will be more formal map drills later on in their education, so I wouldn't make this too stressful of a part of it. They're still gonna understand the idea that all rivers lead to the ocean, and the kind of tides and stuff of the lakes from this book. And so the map work would be ideal, but again, don't stress it. And then there's also some just geography ideas that you're gonna cover, and they're listed there. I don't have them pulled up right now, but it's like the earth is round, you're learning about directions, you're learning about the compass. And the point of these is just for you to familiarize yourself with them. So for term 1, that would be 12 weeks. So have those in the back of your head. Maybe make a little sticky note and put it like on your dash while you're driving or on a walk, and just talk about these ideas with your kids. Or show them a globe and be like, did you know the earth is round? And again, don't lose me here. I know that there are a lot of people that don't believe the earth is round. But I'm just gonna assume that if you're watching this video, that is what you're going to choose to teach your child, because I don't think you're gonna like the rest of this curriculum if you are kind of in that camp. But those are some geographical ideas that you're going to discuss with them, and those will happen all throughout the different years. But this does not have to be a formal sit-down lesson. It's just something that you're supposed to point out as you're walking and living life. Okay, so nature study is the next thing. And if you've watched my other videos, this is not something I've always done a great job at. I understand how to do it. It's just gathering everybody and making it work is sometimes hard. So Ambleside has yearly ideas that the whole family can cover in nature study. And the gist of that would be that you would have this book, Handbook of Nature Study, and you would read about those topics from this. And then as you're on nature walks or as you're in your backyard, your kids can ask questions and you have answers because you have been studying it. And you can also just throw out little tidbits of information to get them curious and to get them thinking. So this is not something that you read with your students. This is something that you read as a parent. And so you're prepared to talk about some of those ideas with them. And then you're also going to read the Burgess Bird Book. And I had a different edition. It was like a Dover Publishers, and I got this one from Living Books Press because it has pictures in it, which is so nice. The other book I used did not have pictures, or it had like random pictures, like the bird did not match the bird we were reading about. And so this was something that I invested in because the kids often want to see a picture of the bird that's being described. And I know a lot of people love this book. For me, it's almost not in a Charlotte Mason approach because it crams so many facts about the birds into the dialogue, and it feels a little forced to me sometimes. But again, I still do it. And some kids love these stories, and some kids, most of the facts, it's just like going over their heads. But Ambleside recommends that you can pick a season of bird that I think this starts in spring when like the birds are returning to the woods, which is up in like upper Michigan. So it talks about the different birds that are migrating from the south. So it says you can pick it based on the season, but I have just let my kids start from the beginning because then they know all the characters and stuff. So either one of those is great. Sometimes if you don't have the book with the illustrations, one year I downloaded, a mom in like the Facebook group had made some pictures of the birds that you could cut out. And then every time we studied the bird, we like put it on the wall. And so we had a little collection of the birds we've studied. And that was cute because then if they saw one of those outside our window, it was right by the window, the girls would point that out. So again, this is just a nature study. This is introducing them to the ideas of the different birds and their habitats and their habits and what they eat and what they do. So that's one of the nature study books. And the other one is probably gonna be one of your kids' favorites for this year, and that's the James Herriot Treasury for Children. This is different than his books for adults, so make sure you get the Treasury for Children. It is full of the most beautiful illustrations. I remember as a kid, my parents had this book, a hard copy of this book. And so I grew up reading this story, and it's just one of the many stories that are in this book that your kids are going to love. Okay, the next subject on the subject list is math. I've talked a lot in my videos. I think my video about curriculums that I've chosen, math. I have experience with the Simply Charlotte Mason arithmetic curriculum. I used their book 1 before I started Beast Academy with my other girls, because to start Beast Academy, you need to be familiar with numbers 1 through 20. So I used that arithmetic book just to play with numbers up through 20 with my kindergartners and first graders, and then would launch into Beast Academy. And another curriculum I've discovered recently that I really like is Math with Confidence. And so I started my kindergartner off in this, and I'm not sure if I'll switch her to Beast Academy or not. My daughter that was diagnosed with dyslexia and possibly dysgraphia too, which is the same thing but with numbers. I decided to switch her to Math with Confidence, although she loved Beast Academy and was doing great, and we still do it for fun. I just wanted to switch it up to make sure I was not missing anything with her education. So for sure, I would start this in year 0. And then in year 1, you can start the first grade one, or you can launch off into Beast Academy level 1. I talked more about Beast Academy in my curriculum video, so check that out if you want to. But that is something you'll do every day. Okay, and then last is some of these extracurriculars like art, music. So with the art, I just follow the Ambleside online program will have you studying one artist per term, and the whole group of Ambleside is studying that artist. There's free prints that you can print out at like a copy store, which I would recommend. Most of them are in the public domain, so they don't cost money unless someone's just taken the time to nicely format them and make them a packet. And so the goal with these is you would just once a week sit down, and you as the mom can have read some about these artists and their background and some of these paintings they've done. That's not necessarily something you will read out loud to the kids, but again, you'll have that information in your head to access it when they have questions. But the goal with art is just to get your kids looking at art and studying it, observing it, asking questions about it, making comments about it, and then you can hang it up on the wall for them to see. And it is so cool. You'll cover, I think they cover six or 12, I don't remember, different paintings throughout a term. And so then if you multiply that by 3 and then multiply that by 12 years, that is just so many works of art that your child is being exposed to. So many more than I was exposed to in spite of my parents' best intentions as a child. So art, there's been some years I've worked it in and some years that I've taken a break, but it's always there and always valuable if you can make it happen and don't make it bigger than it needs to be. Doesn't need to be any unit studies on the artist. There doesn't need to be any trying to copy their painting. Just take it for what it is, observing beautiful works of art. And then music, the folk songs and hymns are once a month. I make those a part of our morning time. There's Spotify playlists that moms make. There's a really great mom called Folks and Hymns on YouTube who does performances of the songs beautifully sung every month. So use those. And then for classical music, you'll do a composer study. And the point of that is just to have that playing in the background, talking some about the instruments. You can watch a YouTube performance of it. Again, don't belabor it. If they're going to become a musician, they will study all of that again in college. I can tell you that. And so just have them exposed to different classical tunes. And then the next time they're watching Bluey, they're going to be like, oh, this is from Jupiter by Holst, they're going to recognize some of those tunes. Okay, the last thing is free reading. So this is a list of books that some kids may be able to read, but some may not. They are just good novels and writings for your child to be exposed to in childhood. So these could be audiobooks that they listen to at bedtime. They could be books that you read to them at bedtime. They can be things that you read in the afternoons. They can be things they read on their own. Just suggestions of ones that would be great for this age. And a lot of times the free reads were written by authors from the time periods we're studying, or they have something to do with the things they're studying in the other years. Alas, my phone did die. And so I've been charging it, and I'm gonna try and finish this really quickly with the charge that's left on it. I tried recording it on an iPad and something happened with the microphone. It didn't record the sound with it. Very depressing. Okay, so I believe I was talking about free reads, that with my older girls, I will assign them some free reading time during the day, whether that's at night or during their school, and they can pick from that list of free reads. And this just helps to make sure they are developing, good taste in books. They may choose to read other easier things in their free time, but at least I know they're getting some of these classic books that are not included in the Ambleside curriculum, but are great books for children to read. Okay, now I'm going to go over what I think my year 1 students' sample schedule is going to be. So as I said, I would usually print out the PDF, just that first page that has the Ambleside readings on it. My printer was not working, so I do not have that copy on me. And I would just write, like next to Old Testament, I would write the initial of the day of the week that I would do that reading on, and that just helps me keep track of everything we're going to do later on. I do more organized schedules for my older girls that are more self-sufficient, but for me, it just helps me keep track, make sure I'm getting everything done in a week. Okay, so every day I'm going to be doing a reading lesson, math, I'm going to be doing handwriting, I'm going to try and do poetry, and we're going to try and sing our folk song and our hymn, work on our recitation. So those are daily tasks that I'm going to try and do every day. The reading and math for me are the most important. So I will just say I'm going to do those 5 days a week. I'm not going to include them in the schedule, but just know those are being done. Okay, so then Mondays is my husband's day off. He's a pastor. He is studying and writing his sermon on Saturdays, We often have a lot of church stuff on Saturdays and Sundays. So for us, Monday is a day off. We typically try and go skiing in the winter. So I try and make Monday a lighter day of school. Now that's hard with my older girls because their schedule is just so jam-packed. They have to do Ambleside readings every day or they don't get through all of them during the week. But for the little girls, if I can, I try not to do Ambleside readings on that day. And you'll just have to get started and see what your child can handle in a day. Some kids, the readings are really easy and great. Some kids, they may be a stretch for them. So just try it out and see what works for you and arrange it. But for me, I'm pretty sure this is going to work. So I'm going to do my daily subjects. And then I'm going to do some of the fun, easier readings. So for me, that's going to be the James Harriet and the New Testament. I'm going to assign those on Monday. Those, we could do them in the evenings before bed if we've been skiing all day. And then just before we go skiing, she gets her math and reading lesson done and she practices her music. And so that is Monday for us. If you have a co-op day, if you want to take a lighter day Friday, whatever, try and work one of those into your schedule. So then Tuesday, we've got the daily subjects, plus I'm assigning Old Testament. Now, if it's more than one chapter of Old Testament, I'm going to split that up. So we do one chapter of the Old Testament reading. We're going to do 50 Famous Stories, which is kind of a fun, easier read. And then I'm going to do the first half of Parables of Nature. For my girls, I needed to split a lot of the Parables of Nature stories in half. But again, just feel it out with your kid and just look ahead. Like once you know about how many pages of each book your kid can handle, if you see that one page of like Island Story or Chesto Stories or whatever is going to be twice that much, then split it into 2 days. So then Wednesday, we're going to continue Old Testament if needed. We're going to do Island Story and we're going to finish Parables of Nature and we're going to do Shakespeare. So Shakespeare would kind of be our fun book in that situation where I might act it out with stuffed animals, and stuff to make that feel a little more lighthearted. And Thursday, if Island Story was long, we'll finish that one. We'll read our Deolaire biography. We'll do the Burgess Bird book. Paddle to the Sea is super short and sweet. And then look ahead. If Chesto Stories is long that week, maybe start it on Thursday. So for us, Thursday is going to be like our biggest week or our biggest day of the week with Ambleside readings. And then on Friday, we're going to either read Chesto Stories or finish it if we started the day before, Trial and Triumph, and then just catch up. Okay, here's a big family suggestion. If you're having a hard time getting through these readings with your younger kid, sometimes I use some of the more fun ones that are not as hard for them to focus on for like a bedtime story. And so some of those I would suggest are the James Harriet book, the Blue Fairy book, 50 Famous Stories, the New Testament, and maybe Chesto Stories if your child clicks with that. So I'd still have them narrate those, so you don't want to save it for so late and then be so tired that they can't narrate. Sometimes a narration in the morning would be fine, and it's kind of fun then to see what sits in their brain overnight. Sorry, my cat is wanting my attention. This worked for us because a lot of my girls were night owls, so they liked reading at night. So saving some of those fun ones. And then the last thing is if you're on a budget and you're wondering how you're going to afford all these books. Well, many of these books are in the public domain, so you can read them online for free, or you can even have them printed somewhere for free. So I'm going to tell you which books I would recommend getting in print and which books I think would be fine to have on a Kindle or something like that. Now, in these years, your child isn't reading any of these books, so it's fine to have as many electronic copies as possible. As your kids get older and they're doing their own readings, you always want them to have the words in front of them, either while they're listening to an audiobook or they're reading. And a lot of people find their kids respond better to physical books, but that is up to you. And in the early years, you can save money by you reading to them from Kindle copies or just free documents. So the ones that I would try and have physical copies of are the Deolaire biographies. And this is strictly because the illustrations are so beautiful in all of these books. So have copies of these, have copies of the Aesop Fables. If you were to take one off this list, it could be this one, but the illustrations are really fun and beautiful in this book. The poetry books, the A.A. Milne and the Robert Louis Stevenson, illustrations are amazing in those. Paddle to the Sea, definitely the illustrations are a huge part of this book. If you're able to get this version of the Burgess Bird book, do that. If you want to save money, get the electronic copy, and then maybe just print out those little, go in the Facebook group for Ambleside, and moms make little like PDFs of cards that you can cut out, because that was fun for my girls. And the last one is the James Harriet. I would recommend the artwork in here because it is just so beautiful. So the ones that you can have digital copies of, Handbook to Nature Study, Blue Fairy book, Chesto Stories, Beautiful Stories from Shakespeare, 50 Famous Stories, Parables of Nature, Viking Tales, and Island Story. This does have some illustrations in it, but they're few and far between, and they're fine to miss out on. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. I know that was a ton of information. I did not script this video as much as I like to normally, so I probably said some things poorly or, you know, forgot some things that I wanted to say. But thank you for watching. I hope this was encouraging to you as you decide to start Ambleside Online or are looking for tips in starting Ambleside Online. And I am going to keep making videos this summer of like, what am I doing this week to get ready for homeschooling? And I will try and share those things with you if you're a new homeschooling mom or you're wanting to see someone else's kind of routine, and especially how they manage it with a large family, because for me, that is the biggest challenge. I love the homeschooling, I love the books, I love all that. It's just hard to do it with so many kids and with a toddler mostly. And I think I'm going to make a video about how to entertain your toddler. My toddler is a prime subject for this video because she refuses to be entertained by almost anything. So if something works for her, I'm pretty sure it's going to work for anybody else too. And then another thing I was thinking of doing as I'm contemplating starting my daughter in year one, my fifth daughter, is actually recording YouTube videos of myself doing a few of the readings each week that are in the public domain and able to. I've been thinking about recording myself reading some of those so that my daughter can watch that throughout the day. And it would be perfect for like if you have a nursing baby and you want to sit down on the couch with your first grader and be able to watch and listen to me read these stories together and then pause it and let them narrate to you. So I've been thinking about taking on that project because I think it would help me, and then it could also be a help to other people that are in a similar situation to me. I know I've talked about in some other videos how sometimes with my girls that needed me to read to them, but it was hard to find quiet times to do that I had to like record myself reading some books, put them on a Yoto card, and let them listen to those in the quiet of their room while I dealt with the other kids. So thinking about doing that, and let me know if that would be something that would be a help to you.